On a plane, once again, having just flown over the vast ice sheet on which I have spent nearly 200 nights of my life in a tent, but we are heading further west and to Canada. A few flights, first over to Calgary, a brief overnight stop, which gives me a chance to enjoy the interior of airport shuttles and not much besides, and then at the airport to head north. On that horizon yonder, we have the eastern extent of the Rocky Mountains. Anyhow, we took off again, and the view out the window a few hours later confirmed what I knew even before having left home in England. Despite being slap bang in midwinter in Canada's Subarctic Northwest Territories, a warm spell had dogged their previous month or so, and so all the thousands of lakes and rivers were not freezing up as well as usual. I needed the vast, deep Great Slave Lake, well over 100 miles wide, to be frozen, because I wanted to walk and ski on it. That's usually not a problem in winter and spring, and my teams and I have trained on it, on and off, for a few years now. The lake offers a very Arctic experience with much more straightforward logistics. Plus there's a large town with an airport right on the northern shore. This was the state of the lake's northern half. It should be all solid, thickening white ice. Here is a sequence of satellite images through the winter so far, and then a comparison to how things would normally ideally have been from more normal years. February to April is more reliable, as any warm spells would have given in to cold long periods, but I needed to use a specific New Year time window that I was free to fly over. So that's not ideal, and I even got bumped from the window seat that I paid extra for by the truly surly, unhelpful WestJet gate staff. WestJet are a shadow of the company I knew years ago. I won't detail here, but there are about a dozen rubbish customer service issues on this simple return journey. I now avoid them if I can. It turned out that my very low profile, but quite long and wide sledge needed its own luggage trolley, which was something. This is the nicer residential end of Yellowknife, my base for a few days, where I was excited to see friends I had not visited this side of the COVID debacle. They generously let me use their heated garage for sorting my gear out, and unlike most trips of mine, the low-profile sledge was fine as normal luggage on the plane. Travelling light, you see, and the first thing to fetch from the baggage was my tent, which I partially installed in the driveway. Always a good idea to put it up in advance. It also means that I can then put it down into the correct sausage shape for storage. One sleeping dog, another sleeping dog. Indoors was a hive of frantic activity. As a result, I got on with food prep. And one more. As I only wanted to be on the ice for a few days and hadn't confirmed a route yet due to all that open water, there wasn't much, and I could focus on enjoying my meals and snacks instead of obsessing over grams and calorie density. Cheese, nuts and chocolate chips, which are small enough to not break your teeth when super frozen, sit alongside mini brownies and mini muffins, which would normally not make the cut. I did notice though that I had newly gathered company in the kitchen. Next, I needed to plan my route and input the GPS waypoints. There's a reason I'm using an ancient backup Garmin GPS unit, and that's because I had multiple brand new ones malfunction on me, and I did a whole video about that. So, no automatic sync between mapping software and handheld unit. I had to sit there and manually punch in all the waypoints and coordinates. Which waypoints though? Well, the lake was still looking hopeless. This means the route I wanted to ski from Hay River was somewhere on the scale between suicidal and impossible, so instead I planned to ski the North Arm, a shallower extension of the lake in the northwest that appears to have frozen up a little better. I didn't actually bring any skis at all, as I'm working on a semi-rigid super light snowshoe design, or rather plates I could better describe as boot sole enlargements. Snowshoe designs have varied throughout the centuries, and to match nearly every type of snow: crusty, powdery, dry, wet, deep, shallow. Anyhow, I've decided that those on the market at present are too complex and don't offer efficient movement over semi-hard, cold-packed snow, the sort you'd find on Arctic lakes, glaciers and sea ice. It's surely therefore high time to try my prototype on the snow. I'm just heading down towards the lake from town to have a little bit of a go with my new designs here, my new snowshoes, snow sliding things with ropes in. I don't know what to call them yet, maybe they'll need a name at some point. Anyway, I just want to make sure that I'm not going to make a complete fool of myself with my design before I set off tomorrow. You can probably get a good sense of how they are put together, and I'm going for super simple, as there's less to break, no ratchets or hinges or rivets or bolts, and easy to fix if something does go wrong. I'm trying to get a sense of the comparison between these plates and normal polar boots in the snow, especially in how it may affect my walking gait. I want to keep it as natural as possible, otherwise you can get weird muscle aches. They are noticeably better at avoiding that annoying, energy-sapping little dip into the snow you get from boots as you step your body weight through them. There's a variety of snow down on the lake edge: snowmobile tracks, wind-packed snow, and some deeper areas of undisturbed light powder. There are some things I'm looking out for. I don't want my ankles being forcibly rotated in or out, as that's a recipe for injury. I also don't want the tips to catch in the snow and risk tripping me, but they need to be large enough to spread the weight and work, so there's a balance. There's more plate on the outsteps so my feet aren't spread unnaturally wide apart. The front and back are curved to help with all of the above. It's not just about increasing surface area and so reducing the sink into the snow. I'm also tapering in the inner tips to avoid infuriating front corner clashes. I've gone with a simple and adjustable way of fixing the buckle straps and snow grippers. Holes drilled into the plate have tough Dyneema cord rope passed through and then knotted. These can be replaced, added and removed quite easily, and can help grip on slidey surfaces without the need for metal teeth or studs. I'm keen to find out how long the little ropes last, and I hope on soft snow they don't wear through or fray too quickly. I'd be happy to replace them every 100 miles or so if I can reap their simple benefits in return. Anyhow, aside from needing to alter the strap configuration to stop my boot rotating slightly outward as I walk, this is a good start. They stay on, they reduce the hassle of walking on light powder, and allow for a much more natural, lightweight gait compared to skis. By the way, skis will of course remain a winner on really flat snow surfaces, but in the real world these rarely exist. Likewise, boots with spikes on bare glassy ice. Wandering back up to the house, I wasn't quite alone. Being a ptarmigan around human settlements in northern Canada is not generally a long-term career. I'd made a sledge especially for this trip, using my normal mould but a much lower profile than normal. I didn't have that many things to store in there, and of course only a week of food and fuel, and I was determined to get this stable 2-metre shell to weigh below 3 kilos, so sub 7 pounds in 19th century. I used a load of spare carbon fibre and dial-in offcuts, so the only real cost was epoxy resin. The carbon stiffens and the dial-in handles impact and flex. The sledge bag is an old one I used to use in cheap polyethylene sledges, made by a British maker who's now retired. Otherwise, a basic dampened rope tray system and simple near weightless knots as they meet the sledge. No need for hauling loops. Time to get on the ice and see what's what. It's best to start off fully ready for a day of travel, so an early rise for me, not my favourite, and just enough time to boil up some water for 3 thermos flasks. I did a comparison test video for some major brands of vacuum flasks a while back, linked in the top right there for you. Just getting the truck warmed up, we're good to go. We're all loaded up on the flatbed. It's midwinter but south of the Arctic Circle, so there's no true polar night, yet we weren't getting a lot of light in the morning. Plus, I wanted a full day of travel, so we packed the truck the night before and set our alarms early. My friends are big cheeses in the Ice Road Construction Company, hence the safety flag and Starlink antenna additions. We had an hour's ride along the frontier trail from Yellowknife to the series of small bays at the end of the North Arm, near the First Nations town of Betchikon. It was a kind gesture, as otherwise getting to my start point would have been a brutal nighttime tariff taxi ride. I was concentrating on making sure I wasn't making any elementary mistakes, or forgetting anything, rather than filming mode, so these very serviceable photos and a little footage from my friend will suffice. The little pull-out from the paved road, what we call a lay-by here in the UK, in the summer is a place for locals to come down and enjoy the lake, but we still found a gap through the trees to access the shore, although the snow was deep in the sheltered area. I set off, quickly achieving a near 3-mile-an-hour pace, which really buoyed me into a super mood. Then, after only a little more than an hour, I was going so well. We're doing about 2 and a bit miles an hour, but then just there, you can see my tracks just over there, I started going through the ice. I went up to about halfway down my boot. Underneath the snow, there's water. I'm going to turn back. It was really nice hard ice over there. So that there is absolutely fine. Then you see there's dark marks there. That's where I went through the slush. I'm not going back over there to film it, that's for sure. Even the beautiful sunrise couldn't make up for the frustration. I'd already had to shelve the full lake crossing, which even in itself isn't too technically demanding. Now, this mini version of even that was clearly not a goer. I knew the lake wasn't in condition even as I flew over the Atlantic, but surely something must be possible. Anyway, we're alive. We're okay. Initially I thought I'd merely entered an area of overflow, where water comes up through cracks or holes in the ice, and created a layer of slush on top of the hard surface, so I picked up the pace to try and get to the other side of it. Then my right foot broke through the ice and I lurched to the side, instinctively using forearms and legs to spread my weight, crawled backwards and to the left, and then carefully made a loop back to where I knew that the ice was good. My lower leg, boots and snowshoes had instantly formed a hard icy crust, so I needed to bash all that off with a ski pole. Anyhow, I managed to get a message sent back to the family I was staying with, and said I was heading back. Going further offshore on patchy thin ice would be foolhardy. Right, so we're started, all in one piece, not entirely dry, but Anyway, you can get a reasonable sense here from the tracker of my route offshore and then the retreat, but without much detail as it was set to ping only once per hour. It was a goodbye to this particular corner of Great Slave Lake, and back in the truck for a ride back in the post-dawn light. He'd only just got back to Yellowknife, so Paul Barry had quite a morning on the road. Back at HQ, Northern life continued as it should. I took 2 or 3 days to reset, enjoy New Year celebrations with friends, and see how the ice was faring. These guys to cheer me up were just the ticket, as far from there being a proper cold spell to help thicken that ice, quite the opposite. There was yet more mild air making its way up from the south. Having lent a hand packing up festive decorations and so on, we noticed the snow was, well, no longer really snow. Your eyes and ears do not deceive you. It's raining on the 31st of December in Yellowknife, Northwest Territories, where it's normally in the minus 20s or minus 30s. And I was supposed to be out skiing in this. So I actually have wet hair. It's raining / sort of freezing rain / sleet. I'm quite lucky I didn't start off south today because my clothing is only moderately water resistant. I would have been soaking in this. We watched the rain from the best possible location, although it did turn to snow again as the evening drew in. Temperatures between -2 and +2 degrees Celsius is totally mad for winter in the Canadian inland subarctic, dozens of degrees warmer than normal. Right, that's going to be my route out of Yellowknife, which is behind me here. You can see sledge all ready to go. We got between -5 and -10 degrees a couple of days later, so I set off for trip attempt number 3. Apologies for the wind. Well, I'm looking forward to getting going again. It should be I'm hoping about 6 hours over to where I'm heading to, down in the islands south of Yellowknife. We'll head off. It's about 9 a.m. This is before sunrise, of course, but we're getting a little bit of half light, so I thought I'd get going early. Let's enjoy. This was, in truth, scant consolation. I've skied this route south and then west from Yellowknife on trading trips before. No real novelty. Once about a dozen miles south-southwest of the town, this was the terrain. Hundreds of small rocky islands, each with sparse clumps of woodland, and reasonably safe lake ice connecting one to the next. In the distance, the vast expanse of the lake's interior. Well, it's all going quite well. Over behind me is where we're going to head over to my destination for this evening, and behind me, surprisingly, is where I come from. This region is an underrated heaven for polar and general cold weather training. If you ignore the trees, which you can by not skiing into any of them, without any of the permits or drama of Greenland or Svalbard, the bankruptcy Antarctica would inflict, certain imprisonment in Arctic Russia, or the exorbitant beer prices of Norway, you can train, hone skills and notch up more miles in tough icy conditions. Granted, right now it was still rather warm, but in general the winter and early spring here will provide a range of ice conditions and lots of cold, with occasional wind. There's a risk that drone footage can go on, and on, and on, should there be someone who just can't handle the thought of not showing you a good chunk of every clip they recorded, and from every imaginable angle. This is no exception. But, at least in this one you can see my tracks in the snow. They were actually made the night before, as I arrived at the island I was aiming for well after dark. I'll give you a short break from this onslaught of aerial Canadian subarctic, but more will come. First, I thought I would show you some footage of me test firing a few bear bangers, which were actually quite hard to film as you need to predict where they'd end up. I actually did a whole episode on wildlife defence in the cold regions. In this area in the winter, there's not much risk. No polar bears, the tundra grizzlies are asleep. Healthy wolves are generally only a risk to peck dogs, and you'd need to really hack off a wolverine to be attacked. By the way, these true flares are legal in Canada, but not in the US, Alaska being the obvious place I'd want them. It's a shame as they are lightweight, reliable and effective for both animal scares and launching more normal signalling flares for communicating with rescuers, or perhaps just saying hi to the person living next door. The bear banger variants are basically a small, launchable flashbang. You just have to make sure in other seasons that you supervise once they land, as they can start a wildfire. I was only out and about for a few days due to that false start at the other end of the lake eating up my time, and all that strange winter rain, but then I began the walk back. Good morning. So this is going to be my final ski back to civilization, and it's finally got cold. We've had days and days in the teens, or even warmer, which has been absolutely bonkers. Anyway, now it's about -30, which is what we want, and the snow already feels better. Great news. I was getting used to the snowshoes and enjoying them, and I've worked out the 2 angles at which I need to fix in some boot sole support so that they stay robustly straight without twisting. The goal, as I said, is to achieve a near natural walking gait. This sort of terrain would actually be fine for skis in parts, but if you ended up with bare ice patches, then skis can be scratchy and slippery, and if wind forms a stroogie, they can be awkward to negotiate around the lumps and ridges. And, as I said at the start, I find it much easier to keep my toes warm when travelling with a walking motion, not a skiing motion. I do like my new Gore-Tex Infinium shell, having moved over my Wolverine fur ruff onto the hood. Looking at this, it's a comfortable gait, but a little longer and more drawn out than if it were a straightforward boots on hard ice. I may want to widen the left edge of the left shoe and the right edge of the right, but reduce the heel extension. Plus, perhaps a narrower but longer front extension with the anti-tripping raised front edge. The conditions were spot on, a fraction below -30, so well within comfortable working bounds, and only with a light breeze. Fans of my oddly predominant playlist on this YouTube channel about Alan the Orange Lifeboat will know why I colour code all my things orange. It helps differentiate similar belongings when in a team. But I wasn't in one of those today, so I walked back. Nothing of particular note happened, and eventually I came across more and more skidoo tracks, a sure sign I was nearing town. The thin ice areas that had seen skiers, dog walkers and skidoo riders fall in the water just days before were now thickening up. This is the view directly south along the lake shoreline, with Mosher Island there in the middle, that offers the best route back to town. Looking north towards the old town, this is where some of the smartest lakeside properties are perched, and another group of snowmobiles are heading back from the other side of Yellowknife Bay, where the First Nations community of Detta is positioned. Final morning in Yellowknife. We're going to be very civilised and go and have some brunch before I get my plane down to Calgary. The temperatures dipped a little further, and conditions would now have been spot on for the lake crossing. Weather conditions, that is. The lake ice remained ropey for a good few weeks to come, but finally closed up as February came around. And it wasn't just us in the subarctic of Canada that were having a weird winter. My friends living up in the far northwest of Greenland were also having a nightmare with broken sea ice at a very, very odd time of year, when it should have been thickening and consolidating. I'll quickly come back to this, by the way, because it shows you how uneven the distribution of cold is around the Arctic. At a given latitude, you're not guaranteed to have the same sort of conditions all the way around the world, and of course that's controlled by the ocean currents and the wind patterns. My friends and hosts, who were busy building the ice roads to the northeast, behind schedule due to all the warm weather, had their patience rewarded with a continuous blast of cold air after I left, which helped to thicken the ice up on all the smaller lakes on their route, and they caught up. Well, I haven't achieved everything I wanted to do on this trip, but isn't that always the way in the Arctic, subarctic, cold places? There's always something that it throws at you and you've got to try and pivot to plan B, plan C. But anyway, I managed to get some serious miles done, which was nice. Navigated in some reasonably tough conditions, dealt with some wet conditions, which I'm really not used to. And also, importantly, those snowshoes appear to be, if not perfect prototypes, I reckon one more iteration and we'll be ready to go. So I'm pretty happy with that, and it was a really nice way to spend after Christmas, New Year's and the first few days of 2024. Anyhow, more soon. Well, there we are. I hope that was slightly more than mildly interesting. And it was a slightly strange trip, but so many of them are, whether they be expeditions or just training or testing equipment. Sometimes you just don't get to do exactly what you want to do, particularly if you're travelling out of season. And I'll finish off with one of the famous Buffalo Airways Electra cargo planes. There we go. Bye.